In 2013, Victorian Premier Dan Andrews was involved in a car crash. The car crash left a teenage cyclist seriously injured. In the years since, there have been inquiries and allegations in relation to that car crash, in relation to who was driving and whether there was a cover-up. Now, we have a rather interesting report that claims there was a serious cover-up and there were serious issues in the original police investigation. So let's go through what the report is saying, and I'm not personally making any allegations against either Dan Andrews, his wife, or against the police. I'm just talking about what this report said. Now, the victim, so to speak, was 15 years old. He was cycling in the Mornington Peninsula when Dan Andrews' SUV struck him. Dan Andrews claims that his wife, Catherine Andrews, was driving the vehicle. He was taken to hospital and suffered severe injuries, including a punctured lung, broken ribs, and a ruptured spleen and internal bleeding. Serious injuries. This obviously was cause for concern, and raised the issue of who exactly was driving and whether they were culpable. Dan Andrews denied that he was even driving, let alone that he'd engaged in any wrongdoing. Dan Andrews insisted that his wife, Catherine Andrews, was driving, and that she had come to a complete stop before turning from a stationary position. Therefore, neither of them were culpable, at least according to his version of events. Police seemed to agree, and they went along with this story, and no one was charged. A watchdog later investigated this and cleared the police of any wrongdoing or of corruption. However, this is not the end of the story, because the victim and his family launched another investigation to further investigate whether there were any issues with the police investigation. A recent review has now suggested that there were. This recent review suggested the police investigation was, quote, deeply flawed, and it suggested that it was designed to avoid implicating a political figure. There are claims that there was, in fact, a cover-up. This comes from a 36-page report from Victoria's former Assistant Commissioner for Traffic and Operations, Dr. Raymond Shuey, who has since passed away. The report makes several key findings, none of which are happy reading for Dan Andrews. And again, I want to insist I'm not making any allegations of wrongdoing against Dan Andrews, Catherine Andrews, or against the police. I'm just reporting on what the report itself said. First, in relation to the events that caused the crash, the report is skeptical of Dan Andrews' version of events. The report states, and I quote, "The statements from both Daniel and Catherine Andrews that the vehicle stopped at Melbourne Road are not consistent with the impact consequences, nor the report by nearby witness Brad Morgan of a squeal of tyres prior to the impact. The effective vehicle stopping distance of 19.2 metres following the impact is indicative of a speed of 45 km per hour prior to the impact. The version, as provided by Catherine and Daniel Andrews, is considered improbable and implausible. It is most probable that the vehicle undertook a sweep turn at speed, cutting the corner and still on the incorrect side of the roadway in Ridley Street, 27 metres from Melbourne Road where the collision occurred. In essence, the report is claiming that the vehicle that Dan Andrews and Catherine Andrews were in was travelling at speed and was not travelling from a complete stop. The implication, therefore, is that first, there are incorrect and erroneous claims that it wasn't a complete stop, and then second, if it was indeed travelling at speed, there might have been a degree of culpability. That, in essence, is what the report is suggesting here. And again, I'm not suggesting that that is necessarily the case, just that that is what the report is saying. Secondly, in relation to who was driving the vehicle, well, the driver was originally recorded as Catherine Louis Kessick. Now, Kessick is Catherine Andrews' maiden name. Now, it's not entirely clear exactly why her name was recorded as Catherine Kessick rather than Catherine Andrews. Perhaps her legal name still is Catherine Kessick. It's not entirely clear. However, assuming that her legal name is in fact Catherine Andrews, recording her name as Catherine Kessick would be unusual. And the report states that, quote, "It is my opinion that this deception is part of a course of conduct and a component of an overt cover-up to avoid implicating a political figure in a life-threatening crash. In essence, there was an attempt to make it look like someone other than Dan Andrews and his wife were involved in this crash." Again, of course, if Catherine Andrews' legal name is in fact Catherine Kessick still, well, there's nothing untoward happening. However, if her legal name is Catherine Andrews, it would look rather weird. And Dr. Shuey also indicated that the lack of scrutiny of this was a little bit troubling. Third, the report argues that the police report lacked critical information such as photographs, measurements, and professional interview techniques, and therefore it was not a thorough enough investigation. Fourth, the report stated that the police also repeatedly refused to provide the victim with details of who the driver was, despite it being their duty to do so. That is, they were trying to avoid disclosing that Catherine Andrews or Dan Andrews were involved. The report claims that this was, quote, designed to conceal the identity of those involved, which harks back to the concerns about who exactly was driving the vehicle and the recording of Catherine Kessick as Catherine Andrews or vice versa. Fifth, the report also has concerns about who was driving specifically and explicitly states as such. Witness Jane Crittenden states that she viewed Catherine Andrews in the passenger seat after the crash. In my opinion, this investigative failure is a deliberate omission. It leaves question of who is driving unresolved and in dispute, at least according to the review. The review therefore is claiming the police simply didn't do enough due diligence about who exactly was driving. They didn't investigate whether it was in fact Dan Andrews or Catherine Andrews. Indeed, it might have been difficult for the police to verify this with absolute certainty. However, the report seems to imply that they didn't do enough in terms of verifying this. Perhaps enough in terms of verifying what the witness found and what the witness said, for example. And when added to all of the other issues, such as the name that was recorded and the failure to provide the details to the victim, it would overall suggest a decision to perhaps try to conceal who was involved in this crash. And then the report suggests that since the situation leading to the crash involved skid marks and would suggest that the vehicle was traveling at speed, the report then seems to imply that there might have been a cover-up, not just of who is driving the vehicle, but the culpability involved in the driving of the vehicle. And this was designed to protect Dan Andrews. That at least is what the report is suggesting. Now ultimately we might never know the truth. After all, the police did their investigation, then there was an investigation into that investigation, and now we've got this third investigation into the investigation of that investigation. Maybe we'll never actually know exactly what happened. At the moment, we can only take it at face value what the police found, which is largely that Dan Andrews was not driving, and they did not lay charges against Catherine Andrews. And, to be clear, they are innocent until proven guilty. But this report is interesting, in that it adds additional texture to what was going on. One would perhaps hope that there's a further investigation to actually work out whether or not there has been a cover-up of a cover-up, or whether this final report has been a little bit erroneous, or is in fact slightly biased. Regardless, it would be good to have more information about this. And I'm sure the Victorian public would like to know whether the police are in fact involved in such a cover-up. Because say hypothetically they were involved in covering up wrongdoing of Dan Andrews, then by parity of reasoning, they might be involved in creating more wrongdoing or over-policing the other side of the political spectrum. That is, maybe the opposition here, or perhaps the people who didn't like the lockdowns, came in for more police scrutiny and more police action than would have been warranted. I.e., it would suggest that the police were biased, at least if this report is accurate. And again, I want to emphasize that I'm not stating the report is for sure accurate, I'm simply stating what the report itself said. And I do not personally make any allegations of wrongdoing by Dan Andrews, Catherine Andrews, the police, or anyone else involved. It's really for those involved to find out. I would, however, like the whole situation cleared up. And I'd be interested to hear what you think about this whole Dan Andrews situation, and whether there should be further investigations into it in the comments below. After all, Dan Andrews is not the most popular premier that Victoria has ever had.